going to start the recording. So Amy's going to start with a presentation, and then I have this attempt I made at a, what we'll call a practice run at how to think about reviews and responding. So it's going to be kind of like us practicing on somebody's data. Okay.
All right, so I'm just going to do a brief introduction before I have to go talk to the animal control person. So this is a talk that I first did for AAN, obviously, hence the AAN in the corner. And it's just talking about how to think about dealing with your grant not being well scored, which we all think of as grant rejection. And it's the stages of grant rejection are like the other stages of bereavement. The first one you do is you deny it. I can't believe it. This was an outstanding grant. You know, how could this possibly have happened? And then anger that the reviewers clearly were stupid, biased, incompetent, or some combination of all three of those. Then thinking about, then comes the bargaining stage where you go through and you read your critiques and you think about all the reasons that you want to potentially formally contest the critiques and the review with your program officer and with the study section and with council. I will tell you, having sat on NIND's council for 4 years, I don't think I ever once saw that go well. You know, generally, if you talk to your program officer, which we will discuss, and they don't think that you have a reason for an appeal, which is the formal process, you can take it, you can still say, yes, I want to appeal it, but it won't go anywhere when it gets to council, because council will get both your concerns as well as the reason from your program officer why she or he doesn't think an appeal is needed. And so just like I said, that kind of bargaining does not go well. Then you get depressed and think about leaving science because you're just never going to be successful. Then eventually somebody convinces you that, in fact, all of us, I will say, I have 2 unsuccessful grant applications in the comments sitting for me, and I have yet to read them because I just got them, and I usually let them sit for a little while so I can read them a little more calmly. But let me just see what this is. Let me make sure that give me 1 second to make sure that my daughter is answering the phone. I think she is, or the door. And then eventually you sort of accept it and realize that you can move forward and then resubmit. So we're going to focus on the acceptance and resubmission stages because those are really the most productive stages of this process. The other ones you are going to need to work through, but unfortunately I can't really help you a lot with those. So just remember that you are in good company. Half of applications are not discussed in most study sections. So 50% of your esteemed colleagues are in the same situation that you are. Funding typically happens with less than 25% of applications to any given study section. So again, 75% of the time, any given application is unlikely to make it through to being well enough reviewed to be funded. But over time, that improves. So when you look at the overall funding rates for like K awards, they are well in excess of 25%. They're probably in excess of 50%. And again, that's because people are persistent and they resubmit. You know, read your critiques carefully. Get past the you know, point where you're just angry about it and be thoughtful as you read it. Not all of your reviewers are necessarily going to agree. So it is relatively likely that you may see comments from individual reviewers that are not the same as, that are not all the same. And the ones you really want to focus on are those concerns that multiple reviewers express. And typically multiple reviewers expressing that concern has a high concordance rate with showing up in the resume and summary of discussion, right? Which is what the study section official or SRO will write up to summarize the discussion. If there are individual comments from individual individual comments, sorry, from single reviewers, you pay less attention to those. Yep. Because, sorry, just again, rodent, dealing with the rodent issue. Um, you know, people have different people, and if you reach your to deal with what you get, it often ends up as a mess. So look for major themes. Multiple people discuss this thing, got mentioned in this in the summary of the discussion. Um, Comment on, look at the strengths as well as the weaknesses, right? If people comment on things as a strength, don't change them, because you may end up changing something. I've seen this numerous times where people restructure their grants based on what was considered a weakness, and in the process removed things that had been considered a strength. So really sort of look at the strengths, make them relatively inviolate as you're trying to remove the weaknesses. And don't do this by yourself. Like all science, best played as a team sport. So have your mentors read it, have co-investigators read it, have colleagues read it, to make sure that what you're taking away is the same as what they are taking away. Sometimes reviewers can be sort of subtle, and there can be, you know, between the lines things that someone with more experience may be able to appreciate. And there also may be some things that are, you know, really fatal flaws that are not listed as such. Like, you will never get a review that says this is a fatal flaw. But something that is listed as a serious concern may well be a fatal flaw, and something that you just have to, if you can't remove it, you have to rethink the whole application and whether you need to go down a different path. And then look at what you can address. Once you've figured out what the key issues are, figure out which of those are addressable, without completely, you know, starting from scratch again, and see if you can focus on those. And most importantly, as you're doing this, work with your program officer. Your NIH program officers are your friends. They are your advocates. They want to see you do well. They are not involved in the reviews, but they often will have listened into the reviews. They may mention things that you know, didn't necessarily get into the summary because they were concerns of the reviewers, but weren't supposed to be concerns of the reviewers, that may be bubbling in the background that you would want to know about. So again, always contact your program officer and make sure that the approach you're thinking of taking to responding to the critiques is going to be the most effective approach. So after doing all those things and thinking through it, then make a concrete plan. Figure out which of the issues that you are going to respond to based on, again, being major issues that multiple people commented on, that the SRO included in the summary, and what you feasibly can respond to. Again, I cannot emphasize enough, do not restructure the entire application based on a single comment from a single reviewer. I have seen so many people fall into that trap, and it just never seems to turn out well. And the amount of revision you need should be proportional to the initial score of the application. There are some really enthusiastic reviewers who will write a 3-page review for something that came really close to being funded, that everybody really liked, but they had all kinds of little suggestions for it. In that case, you could do yourself more harm than good by being overly enthusiastic in your response. So just, you know, think about, based on the score, really the degree to which you need to revise the application. As you think about that, you have to think about the critical 1 page that you have called your introduction, that in which you need to be able to summarize everything important that you did in revising this application. Changes that you put into the revised application that you don't comment on in the introduction may or may not even be noticed, right? So if you're making a change, make sure you do it in the introduction. I tend to like to do it as a point by point. This comment by the reviewer, this is how we responded, this comment, this is how we responded. Now, that said, you have a page, right? So this is where, if all 3 reviewers or 2 of 3 reviewers commented on something, you don't have to list exactly what they said. what you can say is all three reviewers expressed a comment regarding the feasibility of aim 3. Right? You don't have to take each of their little snippets and put it in there. In response to this, this is what we did. So again, this is where you want to go through and clump the individual comments from reviewers along with the comments in the summary together to get major themes, and have, like, you know, if there are only a couple, 2 or 6 themes that are coming out of that, and list those themes, rather than I've seen people literally go through, because people, the reviewers will bullet point their comments, go through every single bullet and respond to it. And the problem is that you will end up not being able to effectively respond that way. So you need to, you know, sort of organize their thoughts and your thoughts in the introduction. Sometimes you really can't respond, that there are things that they brought up that you're just not going to be able to respond to. There are 2 approaches to that. One is to hope they don't notice. That often is not an effective way. The other is to say, you know, I know that, you know, their viewers were concerned about X, Y, or Z. These are the things that I could do about that. I couldn't do, if there are like specific suggestions that you just don't think you could do, I couldn't do this, and this is why. Either in reality, it's not going to work with your experimental design. You know, something that the reviewers don't know. You've tried that, it's not feasible. But don't just like, if there's a major issue, don't just like ignore it and hope that answering, you know, 3 out of 4 of their major concerns is going to do it. Just be honest and say what you can do and what you can't do it. And again, make sure that if you want them to notice something, that it's in the introduction. Generally, people, they do like it if you mark where you've made significant changes in the manuscript and your application, not just like typos and stuff. But what they generally don't want you to do is, like, you know, go through track changes, because that just gets really hard to read. Also, don't italicize or underline every single change that you make, because again, that just tends to make for a very difficult to read application. You know, Brenda can chime in later what her preference is. I often do the little lines on the side, because that's not messing with the text. But if people want to quickly refer to figuring out where you've made the change, they can. And then in the introduction, I'll actually, for significant changes, I'll say, as you can see on page X of the application, or in the first half of, you know, the innovation, or in the innovation section, I'll, you know, direct them to where I have made the changes so they don't have to look too hard. Remember that your reviewers are not, I mean, in theory, they get paid, but you can read 10 R01s. You could spend, you know, 40 hours on review plus the study section, and you get like $200 for that. So they're not really getting paid for their time. You know, let's face it, it's a sort of pay to play thing. But they are providing a service. It is a lot of time. It's on top of their regular jobs. And they don't want to, you know, and so we need to be respectful of that, and grateful for the expertise that, and the service that they are providing. Even if you don't really want to thank them, you probably should. If you just made a mistake or were unclear, just say that, you know, I apologize that this was not clear to the reviewer. Right? Sometimes things are crystal clear to you because you know exactly what you want to do, but they just aren't to others. Instead of saying, you know, this was very clearly written in the application, you know, that's just poor form. And along the same lines, that's where, you know, defending yourself, as good as it feels when you're writing it, again, is not going to endear your reviewers to you. They're professionals. They're not going to necessarily take it out on you, but it won't make them think favorably as they are reading through your application. And sort of like the specific aims, you want your reviewers to think well of you as they are reading. If you really disagree with the reviewers, make sure it is on a scientific basis, right? And provide, you know, the evidence that you can in favor of your opinion. Again, do not be disparaging to your reviewers. As much as you may think they're idiots who can't read, telling your reviewers the problem is they're illiterate is not going to be helpful to you when they review your application. And again, remember, if there was something you thought was there that they didn't see or understand, it may be because your application is really dense. It's not as obvious as you think it was, or not as obvious to somebody who is reading 10, uh, long applications, long and complex applications. So, sort of give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. And again, just because the reviewers found weaknesses in your application and didn't think that of the small number of applications that were at the top, yours was, not amongst it, doesn't mean that they're necessarily biased against you. It doesn't mean they're incompetent. It doesn't mean that they hate you. It just means that, this was their review of the application, and their job is to figure out which application is the strongest. They're not the ones deciding that only the top, 18 or 15% gets to get funded, right? That's coming from budgeting, which is a congressional level decision. So what they have to do is say what the strengths and weaknesses are based on that and score it, so that hopefully the strongest applications can be identified. Everybody, including all of your reviewers, would like to be able to fund a larger percentage of applications than we can. Certainly true for CNCDP. We would love to be able to fund many more people than we can. We just don't have that money. Remember, team sport, ask your mentor, ask colleagues, make sure they read your revised, talk to them before you do it. And then after you write your introduction revised application, have them look at it again. Do not ask them to read it 2 days before you need to submit it. Give them time to read it so that they can be helpful and so you can incorporate their changes in a thoughtful way. If you ask 3 people, you may get 3 different opinions, right? So again, give yourself time to consolidate and incorporate what may be different recommendations. So again, major concerns, address them in a clear and concise way. Make sure that somebody who is not a uber expert in your particular field is able to understand anything that was described as a concern, because it was confusing or not easily understandable by the reviewers. And if you have access to mock study sections, again, that can be very helpful. So that's it. A lot of this is from, I got a while ago online. The NIH actually has some grant tips, and they specifically talk about responding to reviews. And then I pulled this out of the website at UMass. I'm sure your institutions may well have, things online as well related to resubmissions of grant proposals. So I think that is it. I will stop.
Do you have
screen
time to
sharing.
answer questions?
Sure. I think
Okay.
my daughter managed.
Oh, she went away. Well, that was interesting. I guess we could wait and see if she comes back. Do you guys have any questions?
A skunk emergency.
Yeah.
Oh, they smell so bad.
So I'll tell you an interesting story while we see if she actually returns. So what, oh, there she is. She's back. I think she's back. Okay, so while we're waiting, when is it time? There you are.
Okay, there I am. Sorry, I hit the wrong red button.
Oh,
There's a
okay.
stop screen share red button, and there's a leave red button, and I hit the leave red button.
Okay. So I was going to bring up when you actually know to bag it. So I think there are certain comments where you may just not be able to overcome them. And one that I've heard is when several reviewers say to you, "This is a fundamentally uninteresting question." That means,
I've only heard that once, and we both know who you're referring to there.
so I heard it one other time, and almost it wasn't quite as blunt, but it was like sort of, "Is this a relevant question to ask?" was sort of the phrase. So
Yeah.
I would think that might be a moment of capitulation and moving on. But what other things?
I would say if your impact score, or significance score is very, very bad, so if you're getting, impact scores of 6, 7, Clearly, either you haven't articulated why your researcher is important, or they're just not going to view it, no matter how you articulate it, they're not going to view it as important. So that's really that's key. You know, significance 3, 4, you can talk them into a better score on that, but if the significance is really low, you gotta figure out either a way to reframe it or think about starting with a different application. Same thing if there is some, you know, if everybody reports, you know, or several reviewers say, you know, this is a major concern or a serious concern, and it is something that you are not going to be able to easily address. You know, it is a major concern that we do not fundamentally believe you are going to be able to make this work, and you don't have evidence that you can do it. We don't believe you're going to be able to recruit the number of patients required for this study. And you don't have any evidence that you will be able to based on prior recruitment. I mean, things that are major concerns that you can't effectively address, you got to worry that you're not going to do a lot better in the next round of review.
Do you ever recommend, even when there's that kind of situation, going back in because well, first of all, you should probably disagree with them, but the second reason is, do you think it pisses them off if you're going to have to go back in with a totally different submission later?
No, I mean, you can, I mean, that's always one of the decisions is always, you know, do I go for an A1 on this particular application, this particular idea, or do I start anew and do a new A0 application, which you're going to do if you don't get it funded in A0 or A1, right? You have to go back and start over again. So you're allowed to do that now. There's no criteria of how much the grant needs to be different from the previous one. If you want to, you know, if there are reviews that you just don't think you're going to be able to address or overcome, and you need to make huge structural changes to the grant, you're probably better going back in as an A0, because the A0 won't come with those comments attached to it, right? So just so you guys know, with your first review, your first application is an A0 for any given grant. The next one's an A1. When the A1 gets reviewed, the new reviewers, even if they're not the same people, will get the reviews for that prior you know, application. So if that prior application got scored an 8 with horrible comments on it, it may be that may so skew your reviewers on your new application that it's going to be hard. Now, there are certainly lots of people that have not gotten, you know, that have gotten quote unquote undiscussed, non-discussed or unscored on the first application that have been able to, you know, get a good score that ended up in funding on the second application. But it depends on those reviews and how acerbic and difficult they are. Sometimes it's just, you know, one relatively easy to fix thing, but still a major, what was considered a major flaw that gets you non-discussed. And sometimes it is to a degree that you're probably just better off never letting anyone see those reviews again, restructuring accordingly and starting over.
Can I ask a question about that? If you're submitting in the next cycle what was originally an A0 that was scored poorly or not discussed, and you're trying to resubmit, or I guess submit as a fresh A0, making some changes, but maybe not the huge list of changes that came with the initial set of reviews, the study section, I mean, would you submit to the same study section? Because the reviewers will likely stay the same, right, in subsequent cycles? Or do you talk to your PO about submitting to a different study section who may maybe understand the impact or the significance of your work a little bit better?
So it depends on if you have that option. So for K08s, K23s, there is a single NINDS study section that typically reviews those. So you cannot get off, you cannot choose to go to a whole separate study section. If there is one reviewer who is dramatically different than the other reviewers, and particularly every once in a while with NST, they'll get some ad hoc reviewers that have a different opinion of the world than everyone else. Sometimes you can get that person excluded from your next review. And you would need to talk to the SRO about that. And you'd need to provide very clear evidence how that reviewer was, clearly very different from the other reviewers. And hopefully they said something that was obviously inaccurate or wrong. And then you can sometimes get them excluded from your review, depending on how inaccurate and wrong the comments are. Sometimes they'll even be placed in conflict, so they're not in the room for the discussion. But that is one option. Now for ours, you can definitely change. You can request a change in study section. They don't have to honor it, but usually if you have good reasoning with the assistance of your program officer, then they will often do that. I know right now, for example, the particular study section that is common for epilepsy, CNNT, has been returning reviews that people are just like, and so a lot of people are sending their grants to other study sections until there's a adjustment in personnel there on that study section. So that definitely happens. You can get a cohort of people who just start to believe what they believe, and sometimes you just got to wait till they rotate off and then go back.
What about? Oh, go ahead.
I don't know if this is a stupid question, but I've gotten the experience where gotten the feedback back, and everyone's been telling me to reach out to the PO before committee meeting, and I've been doing that, and I was advised to write kind of a one-page response to the summary statement as well. I haven't gotten a lot back from the PO of specific advice. I just was curious what folks' experience were like. Were there specific things that you would ask the PO before committee meets? So I don't want to bother him, but at the same time, I don't know if there's things I should be specifically asking.
It depends. There are different ways that you interact with your program officer. Sometimes your score is a little on the border and you want your program officer to advocate on your behalf. Which they can do. And in that case, that's when you want to do your, one-page summary of how you would respond to these reviews, and how you'll modify your approach based on the reviewer's comments. And usually they will give you some guidance about that. Your program officer will. If it's more like, how do I respond in the next round with my introduction, then again, they won't read. Most of them will not be able to read your introduction, but they can certainly give you recommendations about which of the concerns are most critical and to respond to. And if you can verbally give them like an outline of how you're thinking of responding to it, usually they will, give you some feedback on that. But I usually find it's most effective actually to get people on the phone, just a quick video conference, and do that, because they just get deluged with emails like all of us do, and their responses to emails are often very short and only so informative.
Okay, thank you.
One thing that I've done for some junior people is I have inserted myself in that relationship if there was no response, or the response was so limited that it was hard to use the data in the way that if there was a specific question that wasn't being answered, then I sent the email myself with, "Hi, like, we're trying to understand what we're supposed to do here." And there's too much, it doesn't fit, the comments are too diverse. We can't understand it. So you might have somebody who knows the program officer better, like more senior, if there's a specific question and they're not answering it, which does happen, I think.
Yeah, and sometimes your mentor or someone more senior can say, you know, I'm trying to help Melanie, and with this, my read of the reviews was that these were the major concerns, and this was my recommendation on how she might approach it. I just want to make sure I'm not sending her down the wrong track, you know, because then it looks like you're a concerned mentor, and you just want, you know, you're not looking for them to tell you what to do, but you're looking for them to confirm the advice that you're giving. And again, that can be very helpful if you know the program officer. If you don't know, I mean, there are plenty of program officers, particularly outside of epilepsy. I don't know. They're not going to respond to me any better than they're going to respond to anybody else. But if you know somebody that's got a personal, you know, got a relationship already with this person, then that could be helpful.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, you're going to start reviewing your critiques?
If you guys think, I have some that some people gave me their initial K reviews. So people that have successfully transitioned from the K-12 to their independent Ks that did not get in on the first round, and sort of, it'll be a little bit of a attempt to kind of walk through what they did. So if you've got time, we can go for it. And I'll turn off the recording so that they won't feel awkward, and this is for posterity. So.
All right.